Welcome to a SecurityMetrics webinar. Today we're joined by Peter Briel of Privaxi, a HITRUST readiness assessor company, and a lot more. You'll learn more about Peter's group in our interview today. I'm Lee Pierce. I'm with SecurityMetrics. I've been with the company about 19 years, working in professional services, audits, pen tests, forensics. Right now I put most of my focus upon HITRUST and penetration testing. And today we're going to talk about the questions that we often get regarding HITRUST. People have a lot of questions. It's not as old a standard as some, and so people rightfully, when they're approached by their partners or other third parties that are asking them to delve into HITRUST, they come to us with questions. And so we're going to talk about a lot of those questions today and see if we can provide some answers for you. Peter, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself first?
Sure, Lee. Thank you. My name is Peter Briel. I am the founder of Privaxi. We are a HITRUST readiness and remediation assessor. We've been in the industry for over 5 years. Myself, I have over 30 years of experience in the information technology and security space. Right? We work collectively with you guys to provide our clients with the end-to-end solutions for readiness, remediation, and validation.
Excellent. And one of the things I want to point out is a HITRUST validation assessor cannot do hands-on work with their clients' data or their processes, controls, policies, and procedures. And our customers do have a lot of needs in that area. And we found that partnering with Privaxi, a readiness assessor, they can do readiness and remediation, writing policies, doing very, very hands-on work. And it allows us to have a separation of duties and keep integrity in the whole process of achieving HITRUST certification. So let's talk a little bit about these questions now that we have. So basically, one of the questions that people have is, what is HITRUST and why might I need to have this assessment performed? A lot of organizations out there understand risk regarding PII, PHI, and also there's a lot of involvement with third parties being the weak spot for data breaches. And so there's a lot of focus, particularly on third parties, but not just exclusively on third parties, regarding the securing of personal identifiable information or PHI as well. HITRUST is a standard that was brought about, bringing together HIPAA, NIST, ISO, even PCI and GDPR. And it's an assessment standard that is now being asked for more and more by companies that are seeking to have a surety from their third-party partners. Here's an example. Health 3PT is an initiative that's focused on improving third-party risk management, and they have specifically come out and said that they accept a HITRUST validation as a standard for the certification to give assurance to their third parties that are working with them. Peter, let's talk a little bit about the three types of HITRUST. People often say, I'm asked to do HITRUST, but what do I do? It's good if you're a third party and you have partners asking you to do HITRUST, you might want to follow up with them about the specifics of what they would require. There are three types of HITRUST. There's the E1, the I1, and the R2. Now the E1 provides entry-level assurance. It's focused on the most critical cybersecurity controls, that essential cybersecurity hygiene is in place. The nice thing about the HITRUST E1 is if you're starting out, it only has 44 controls that you need to address, and it encompasses cybersecurity practices. It's very good for people who are just getting their toe dipped in the water of compliance to start there. It is pretty simple. Most organizations will want to move on from the E1, perhaps to the I1 or the R2. The I1 is a step up. It includes all the 44 controls that were in the E1, but they add additional controls. And so it adds more controls, I think about 182 total controls. And it is definitely a step up. It is more critical. It deals with more inclusion of controls that are recognized as more along the lines of leading cybersecurity practices. And one of the elements of the I-1 is that it is in a 2-year cycle. The E1 is yearly. If you were to stay with the E1, it would simply be 44 controls every year. If you went to the I1, the second year is called the rapid recertification, where it's a reduction of controls reviewed from 182 down to 60. And that makes for a more affordable validation in the second year. And that's the I1. The R2 then is probably what they call the gold standard. It is the biggest and the most comprehensive. And while it includes all of the controls that we've already mentioned in the E1 and I1, it adds on to those controls anything applicable to your business. So for example, to even understand what the R2 would look like for your business, we would need to first do a factoring exercise where we go in and learn attributes of your company. What does your involvement with third parties look like? Where do you store data? Very specific. Do you have bring your own device policies? Do you handle physical media that involves sensitive data? The questions go on and on, as well as other questions regarding certifying bodies, like are you trying to satisfy Texas and their particular laws, for example, or California? Are you wanting to add in additional elements? The R2 validation assessment for certification can be typically for a small footprint would be in the high 200s for control count, up through 500-600 controls. For more complexity, you could literally go crazy with it and get over 2,000 controls involved in your validation, but I haven't seen people do that. But there is that potential. The next question I guess we would talk about would be, how long does a certification take? That's another question you need to ask yourselves internally and ask the people with whom you're working regarding what kind of deadlines do I have. If it's a very short deadline, what you might want to look at is the E1, because you can achieve an E1 in 3 to 4 months, typically speaking. The I1 steps it up a bit. You're looking at between 6 and 8 months to achieve the I1 validation. Now with the R2 on the calendar, as I'd mentioned, it can have a varied number of controls. So the time to achieve it is also varied. We find that most people with the smaller footprint are achieving their R2 validation between 10 and 12 months, sometimes 13, 14. You could literally go almost 2 years working on the R2 if you have a very complicated environment. So we like to have all of the understanding there that it could be pretty complicated, but doesn't necessarily have to be if you have a smaller footprint. Peter, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, one thing to mention, Lee, is that each type of certification has a level of assurance, right? The E1 being a low level of assurance for your partners, I1 being a middle level of assurance, and then the R2 is the highest level of assurance because again it encompasses so much more, right? So for organizations like you said that want to just step into the framework, we always suggest, hey, listen, the E1 is the way to go, depending on the business needs, right? What's the requirements? What are your partners asking for, or that that business need, right? So but most of the time, folks that really don't have that requirement, then they usually like to start with the E1, which is again low level of assurance. I'm sorry, basic hygiene for security.
Yeah, and you don't have to feel like you're locked into any one particular standard. So, for example, you could start out with an E1, and in the next year you could jump into the I1 or the R2. It's very fluid that way, so you're not locked into anything. One thing I failed to mention with the R2 is it too is a 2-year cycle, and the second year is a sampling of the controls. A big relief, actually, because the R2 second year is just a couple of domains, if that, pulled from each of the 19 domains. So you could have as few as 20 to 30 controls assessed in the second year, which means the costs of your R2 second year is much less. And the name of the R2 in the second year is called the interim assessment. I wanted to make sure and add that. Another question that people ask is how much work or hours or resources is it going to take to prep? And I think this might be good to introduce the fact that if you're going it alone and you're doing your own readiness work, it could be several hours a week to work on this. This is one of the reasons why SecurityMetrics brought Privaxi in as a partner to work on this, is because a lot of our customers simply were almost throwing their hands up saying, this is crazy, we don't have time for this. So Peter, talk about how your team works on a weekly basis and the work you do. If you don't do it, the hours that the company themselves would have to be doing for readiness work and prepping for this type of validation.
Yeah, we created a model around the need for clients to be able to focus on your day-to-day operation, not having to worry about all the intricacies and around the HITRUST program, right? What does that mean? That when you engage with Privaxi and SecurityMetrics, we provide the full support from A to Z. What does that mean for the organization? That we become an extension of the organization's team for the time of the project, right? Throughout that time frame, we basically break down the domains, each domain by domain. We perform a gap analysis to make sure that we identify current state versus future state, right? We leverage any of the work that was previously done. If the company has done any PCI, any NIST 153, ISO 27001, we try to leverage as much of that as possible in order for us to be able to cross-reference what the work that was done to the current requirements for HITRUST, right? We develop policies and procedures for the organization, right? We just don't give you a template, right? We make sure that we gather the evidence that's required, perform the gap analysis required, and develop those policies and procedures accordingly. At the same time, we assist the organization with the technical controls that are required. We are traditionally a managed service security provider that became a HITRUST ratings and readiness assessor. We also have expertise in AWS and Azure, so we could definitely go down into the weaves with the client and identify the technology that's required, tell them how to pretty much configure those technologies to meet their requirements for HITRUST. Right, from an operational standpoint, then we then as mentioned, we address anything that has to do with the policies and procedures, make sure that we massage it accordingly to the organization's need. It's presented to the organization so they can understand what they have, and then once that's done, then we make sure that we upload everything that needs to get done through MyCFS. Make sure we work with with SecurityMetrics for the validation as well. Right, so we provide both the A to Z complete solution for like that the client is not lost in transition and then they're nervous about, hey, listen, I don't know what to do with this. Do I have the expertise internally? You don't really need the resources internally as much as usually you would need with other firms.
And that's a lot of work that Privaxi does with the readiness effort. When you're engaged with a customer for readiness, what type of time constraints are they looking at each week to engage with you to make sure the project's going forward in the readiness and remediation?
Typically, the time engaged with us is maybe once or twice a week, an hour, per day. So we could pretty much go over the domains and gather, the requirements, right?
So 1 or 2 hours a week then?
Exactly. We like to understand the environment. Again, nobody understands the environment like the client, right? So for us, it's crucial and essential to understand their business operations and their environment so we can identify what's processing EPHI, who it touches, the systems that it has, and so forth, right? So yeah, it is a 1 or 2 hours engagement on the front end, but on the back end, we provide the full spectrum of support with our HITRUST auditors, our policies and procedures folks, and our technology folks.
Okay. Another question that people ask is, how do I prioritize? How do I know what to do first? If you could talk a little bit about the incubation period and how we need to make sure we have things buttoned down and in place for a time period, that might help understand how to prioritize the effort.
That's a great question, Lee. And HITRUST has a famous 90-60-day incubation period. What does that mean? That in order for you to present to the auditor, in this case, a validation team, which is SecurityMetrics, the evidence for technology the technology has to be in place for 90 days. What does that mean? That means that, let's say you don't have a firewall. You cannot install a firewall yesterday and then provide that as evidence to the auditor the next day, right? It needs to be in place for at least 90 days, right? So what do? We already have a predefined list of requirements that we know that are standards throughout the framework that we ask prior, once we engage in the program. So we like to tackle the technology because, again, you require 90 days for the technology and 60 days for the policies and procedures, right? They have to be in place for that time. So we like to get ahead of the game and focus on those technology requirements so we could have that incubation period out of the way and focus on other areas in the actual framework.
That's great. Thank you. Another question that is often asked is, how does this compare to other assessments that I've already done? They'll say, we've done SOC, or we've done NIST CSF, or 853. How does this compare? NIST is a prominent player in how the HITRUST standard was put together, and as well as ISO and HIPAA. Peter, could you speak a little bit to that? What your people see when they're working as a readiness and remediation team, how to leverage what is already going on in their environment with NIST or ISO or SOC 2 or et cetera?
HITRUST is more comprehensively, but it integrates very well with other frameworks like the NIST, PCI, ISO 2701 and HIP, right? Now, what HITRUST does is it covers a broader range of controls, right, for various domains like cybersecurity, privacy, risk management, and so forth, right? It also is more rigorous on the documentation. I know we've had organizations that say, hey, yeah, I just finished a HIPAA audit and I have some policies and procedures. Well, yes, but when it comes to HITRUST, you have to show more evidence, right? It really, when it comes down to the evidence collection, it goes down to the nitty gritty, right? So it's a more robust, again, a more comprehensive. I call it, they call it the gold standard of cybersecurity for a reason, right? You really have to, customize, those procedures, those policies, and those evidence in order for you to meet the requirements for HITRUST.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that is important to note is that as people are working on evidence for other types of standards that are required, like SOC or PCI or NIST, Privaxi specializes in helping them map the controls so that they don't have to go back and redo efforts wherever possible, leveraging what they've already achieved through a mapping exercise. Now, another question people ask is, I'd like to get a validation. And why are you recommending a readiness assessment? And I think it's really important to understand when you're doing a readiness assessment, you're basically making sure the ground is fertile and ready for that validation. Peter, have you ever been in your past experience involved with someone who does very little on preparation and they just want to do evidence gathering with you, and how that plays out?
Yes, obviously, we actually encounter that all the time, right? There's again, and it boils down to resources internally in companies that sometimes they don't have the time, right? So, they engage with us because they say, listen, we're preoccupied, we don't have the resources, and we would like to engage with you to just make sure we gather, all the evidence that we need in policy and procedure. So, definitely we do, come across a lot of folks that require those services.
Yeah. And I would say that's rather typical.
It is.
Sometimes they'll be right in the middle of trying to get ready for something like this, and there's some fluidity in the marketplace, and people will actually leave and take another position, which leaves them in quite a lurch sometimes, trying to keep the continuity going with the efforts that they were performing there.
Right.
So when it comes to Privaxy's involvement with their environment, some people are concerned, like, well, I don't know about having an outside party helping me with this. So we see anything from consulting, if they're very buttoned down on security, they don't like to have a lot of hands-on going on, all the way into read-only access to actually pull evidence. What would you say the breakdown is with your customers that are doing readiness with you? How many of them even allow read-only access up to that point?
Many allow only read access, right? Again, the readiness aspect of HITRUST is a very crucial step, to set the foundation into successful certification, Lee, right? So our program is extremely flexible, right? The client can provide us read-only access so we could gather the evidence for them, take the screenshots that are required, or they could say, you know what, as long as all the legalities are in place, right? You guys come in again, become an extension of our team, and gather all the evidence and implement the technology that they may require. As I mentioned earlier, I started this business as a managed service security provider, right? So we have expertise in AWS and Azure internally. So some clients, don't understand what they need to enable, in Azure or AWS. So our engagement is all encompassing. So we do provide those services as we progress through the readiness stage.
Okay. And when it comes to the milestones of a readiness assessment, we start off with kind of predictable steps, right? So there's a gap, there's the overall understanding of the environment, there's a review. Could you walk us through the typical milestones of a readiness assessment?
Well, the first thing that we have to do is create the scoping, right? We have to understand the scope, right? And I think it's crucial to mention that you do require to purchase a MyCFS subscription, which actually we'll break down the cost shortly, right? So as we engage with the client, obtains a MyCFS, and we create a scoping. We do a scoping call to create the actual framework or the object, right? In this case, the whole requirement for HITRUST. There's going to break down the domains and the control requirements, right? If it's an E1, again, as we know, it's static predefined controls, right? For the I1 as well, right? So once we have all the defined scope, then we start collecting the technical requirements as mentioned, which are I think for us is key to do the technology first, as mentioned, because of the incubation period. Right. Once we start breaking that down, then we start gathering the evidence, for both the technology, right, and we start reviewing the policies and procedures. Then, the breakdown is pretty simple. Do the readiness, estimate a timeline for the readiness to gather all the information. Once we get there, that we have purchased a MyCFS portal, then we select a validation date that we would like to submit all the evidence and documentation technology over to SecurityMetrics, right? That validation needs to be defined within the MyCFS subscription, right, or portal, right? Once that validation is set, we also need to set our QA slot for HITRUST to be submitted.
Okay.
Right. Again, you cannot go through the certification progress unless you go with a validation firm like SecurityMetrics.
All right. And so MyCSF with a subscription from the HITRUST Alliance themselves is not optional. It's if you want to work toward HITRUST certification, you're going to be working the MyCSF portal. And customers will often ask us, okay, so how much does that cost me? And it's important to note that your readiness and your validation assessors do not bill you for the MyCSF or the QA scheduling with HITRUST. You do that directly with them. Last January 2024, I received some information from them regarding pricing. This could be fluid, so don't hold me to it as of right now, today in September 2024.
I want to hold you to it, Lee.
Yeah, don't hold me to it. But basically, they offer a yearly subscription to the MyCSF portal. It can be probably between $16,000 and $18,000. There's some discounting involved that they'll provide you if you choose to do a 2-year agreement with them. And then there's also the establishing the evaluation on QA that they will perform on the validation submission that we would perform. And that QA is an additional cost that you schedule with them. E1 around $5,700, I1 $6,650, and R2 $7,750. And this basically pays for their time to review our validation. Which brings me to another element. How long does it take after we've submitted it? I hope I'm not jumping ahead, but basically, when we complete the validation and submit it to them, it can take several weeks for them to do the QA depending on the load that they have in
Right.
their queue, as well as whatever questions they might have of the validation assessor regarding evidence, follow up on things. So it's not an automatic, we do the validation and you're done. There definitely is a time element that HITRUST picks up the ball then at the end and works through the review of that. One thing I might mention here is corrective action plans. So when you're doing your readiness assessment, you want to do so in a way that you're cleaning up the landscape of potential corrective action plans or CAPs later by the time the validation is complete. This is another reason why we're so excited to work with Privaxi is that so far our customers have had 0 corrective action plans when we're done. When we use the combination of Privaxi for readiness remediation and SecurityMetrics on the validation, every single one of our customers as of this date have had no corrective action plans. We're pretty proud of that. And it makes for far fewer headaches for the customer as they're working through the next year of maintenance and prepping for their next anniversary on that. Another question people ask us, Peter, is the on-site required, or can everything be achieved remotely when we're doing the validation? And it's important to know you do not have a requirement to do an on-site validation. Occasionally, a customer will ask for some on-site work to be done, but it's very rare. It can all be achieved remotely. Another thing to understand is that there are certain tools that we use to help you. We can use your tools as our customer, or you can achieve great organizational success through some tools that Privaxi provides. It's like some of the tools that you provide, Peter, typically that allows people to collaborate. What would those be?
Collaboration tools, we like to integrate our, Asana. We use, ServerLink for our document repository at times, right? OneDrive for collaboration documentation. Microsoft Teams as well, just to make sure we, have constant communication, and also Slack.
Okay.
Right. So we like to make sure that the client is up to date with everything that's going on. Constant communication between both the clients and the validation team, in your case, SecurityMetrics, and also the readiness team with Privaxi, right? So the client could be up to date with everything that's going on throughout the process on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis.
Yeah, that continuous momentum is really important when teams are pulled in different directions to do things just running the business day to day. They need to feel continuity going on with their partner. So that's really important. Another important question to ask is what happens if we have staff leave during our efforts? And I wanted to kind of highlight the positions that Privaxi provides, like virtual CISO. We recently were speaking with someone, this just came to mind, sorry to just bring it up, but we were just recently speaking to somebody, and they lost 3, if I remember, is that right? 3 staff members? Right. 3 staff members. And they were like, we're just going to have to put everything on hold. And what we help them understand is when you actually have a readiness assessor partner like Privaxi, you're literally looking at the ability to add staffing in such a way that we can get the job done for you, even if you're running on a skeleton crew in your own company.
Right. And the reason why we partner with SecurityMetrics, Lee, is because we can provide with our services and yours the full spectrum of support for the client. Right. SecurityMetrics provides pen testing, right, vulnerability testing, forensics, right, validation, PCI, and much more. We provide the readiness remediation technology. So the client could feel that, hey, listen, although I don't have the resources or I lost some resources, we have a partner that could provide us the whole, spectrum of support, right? So again, we saw a need for this in the market. We understand that it is a very difficult process at times for clients, and folks are preoccupied with other things that they have to do on a day-to-day basis, right? That's why we created this model that a lot of folks are gravitating towards too.
Yeah. And I will say that our customers stay with us because they love us so much. So we have high retention on
They
that.
like you more than me, Lee.
I don't know. But we have great continuity with our customers. They come back.
Yes.
They're happy with the results of what they're getting. Another question that people ask us is, who do I engage? We're talking with SecurityMetrics and Privaxi here. Do I have two separate master services agreements, statements of work? How does that work? Basically, we partner together, and all of the legal documentation you'll receive will come from SecurityMetrics. That will include everything: the statement of work, one single master services agreement, a carve out for you to obtain full ownership rights to any intellectual property that is developed for you by Privaxi. Everything, billing, invoicing, all comes through SecurityMetrics, so you don't have to worry about managing two vendors in this effort. Another question people ask us about is, so I get this HITRUST validation certification, can that translate into other certifications? What else can I get? It's important to note that if you're doing the R2, you're just a short set of steps away from the NIST 853. You can get that done. A lot of the heavy lifting's already done in the HITRUST R2, so that the 853 is not a super daunting task. Also, the ISO 27001 is also very achievable after obtaining the HITRUST R2.
SOC 2 as well. We have a lot of folks that cross-reference a lot of all those controls of SOC. PCI. We have a lot of cross-referencing as well for endpoint protection and so forth and so on when it comes to technology, right? So there's a lot you can achieve cross-reference when you achieve the HITRUST certification, because again, like I mentioned earlier, it is a gold standard of compliance, right? Because it's so robust and it covers so much.
Another thing that people will experience when they're just contemplating doing the HITRUST is they may not like the footprint of their technology at the given moment of contemplation of this, and they may want to go to cloud. That's another reason to have our team helping you, because Privaxy's team is fully certified in helping with inheritances with AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, advising, helping people make sure that they leverage everything that's there, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel on your efforts going into the cloud. Another thing to mention is HITRUST just, I believe, last week, so we're talking September 2024, they mentioned that there's a new add-on for the I1, which is the middle tier of the validation choices you can make with HITRUST, where they're adding the HIPAA security rule and the HIPAA privacy rule. You can add that into your I1 and make that even more effective in what you're trying to achieve if you're in the HIPAA space. That's something we wanted to make sure and mention, because in the past people have said, well, I really need the R2, but I don't know if I'm ready for it. I need that, but I guess I could do the I1. Well, the I1 is becoming more versatile, so that might be a more viable choice for you in the future. Another question we get is, what if we have significant changes at the completion of our validation? What happens? I know customers have come to you, Peter, in the past where they've made some significant changes. There's a process, right? Would you like to talk about that a little bit, Peter?
Well, if there are some changes, then again, we identify those changes, and if it's significant enough, then we have to notify HITRUST, to make sure that we are, they are aware of the changes, and if it's a significant change, then most likely we have to undergo, a reassessment of those changes, right? So, again, make sure that we specify the changes that were being done, and then try to assess as much as we can. I mean, again, that's not to say you're going to have to do everything all over again, but a significant part of that change needs to be documented, assessed, and submitted to HITRUST.
Yeah, and it's important to note that we want to include HITRUST themselves in this conversation, because we don't want to overspeak or overestimate what is and isn't possible if significant changes have occurred. Or we were recently speaking with someone who was going through a merger acquisition while they were doing their validation. And like, what happens? What do we do? And the safest thing to do there is definitely involve HITRUST in the conversation, because we wouldn't want to give you advice that HITRUST would slightly disagree with or even significantly disagree with. So we have our inclination of understanding of what would occur there, but we want to definitely bring HITRUST into the conversation because they're the authoritative voice.
That is correct.
So another question people ask after they've completed it, our customers come to know a certain level of service and assurity after working with us on their validation, there's something that they could do afterwards to keep their certification fresh throughout the year, keeping their preparations up to date. Would you talk a little bit about that, Peter? You have a service that specifically addresses this.
Yeah, we established a service called CAMP, and CAMP stands for Continuous Assurance Management Program. As we know, Lee, we've discussed this many times. Security is a point-in-time certification, right? So once you get certified, the next day something could change, right? So how do we know that we are going to be buttoned up for the next year, right? Once HITRUST comes calling again, and we have to go do the reassessment or the interim assessment or maybe the revalidation the second year, right? So the program was designed to determine the task or that need to get done throughout the year on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, right? To make sure that we keep our information security management program up to date, right? So CAMP was assigned to work with the clients to make sure that the audits are getting done, the offboarding is getting done properly, the onboarding, the security awareness of the staff. Make sure that you're monitoring those logs. Make sure that you're doing your vulnerability testing. Make sure you're doing your pen testing. Things that can affect your recertification. So that's what CAMP was established again with the point of view of assisting those folks that don't have the time to really maintain this program and keep it updated. We come in there on a monthly basis and we make sure that everything gets logged. We work with the business. Again, we become an extension of the organization throughout the year.
That's great. And so it's important to know that you really do have a partner when you come with SecurityMetrics, and Privaxi is the partner in your achieving, whether it's penetration testing, vulnerability assessment scanning, policies and procedures development and writing, review of your technology, keeping it fresh, and obviously getting into the MyCSF portal with HITRUST and doing the validation, getting your certification. We're very confident with the process that we have in place, and we're very happy with the results that we achieve. Well, Peter, we thank you for coming on board today and talking with us a little bit about this. And we're excited to provide scoping exercises for our customers that contact us through our website. You can reach out to us and we'll help you understand a little bit better how this all applies specifically to your company's needs. And we can provide a specific quote and help you understand a timeline so that you can get some traction on these next efforts that you need to go after. Thank you for your time today, and we'll wrap this up now. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you for having me. Take care.